My grandmother pinched everyone's cheeks until they bruised and called it love while insulting them. The new member of the family gave her what she asked for. My grandmother Eleanor had this thing about establishing dominance through physical affection that nobody asked for. She'd pinch your cheeks until they turned red, grab your arm hard enough to leave marks, and pat your face while telling you everything wrong with your life choices. She called it showing love, but everyone knew it was about control. At every family gathering, she'd make a big show of pinching everyone's cheeks in order of how much she approved of them. Her favorites got gentle pinches with compliments. People she disapproved of got these vicious pinches, while she'd say things like, "You'd be prettier if you smiled more," or maybe if you lost weight, these cheeks wouldn't be so puffy. I was always in the disapproval category because I'd chosen to become a teacher instead of marrying rich like she'd done. Every holiday, birthday, or random Sunday dinner, she'd corner me and pinch my cheeks while loudly announcing to everyone that I was wasting my youth on children who weren't even mine. She'd hold my face between her fingers and shake it while telling me about some doctor's son or lawyer she knew who might still consider me despite my poor choices. If you tried to pull away, she'd pinch harder and say young people had no respect for their elders. If you said it hurt, she'd announce you were too sensitive for the real world. My cousin once showed up with bruises on her cheeks from Eleanor's pinching, and Eleanor said she should be grateful for the attention. The worst part was she did this to everyone, even strangers. Waitresses, cashiers, and anyone under 60 was fair game. She'd grab nurses at her doctor's appointments, pinch their cheeks, and tell them they reminded her of her disappointment of her grandchildren. She got kicked out of 3 restaurants for touching staff. She'd go to my classroom during parent conferences, pinch my students' cheeks, and tell them their teacher would probably quit soon to finally start a real family. The principal had to ban her from school property. My brother met someone new last year, a woman named Diana who seemed really sweet and quiet. Eleanor was thrilled because Diana looked like the type she could control. At their first meeting, Eleanor immediately went for Diana's cheeks, squeezing them while saying she hoped Diana could teach my brother to be less of a disappointment. Diana just smiled and took it. Eleanor was so pleased with herself, telling everyone Diana understood respect for elders, unlike the rest of us ungrateful brats. The wedding planning became Eleanor's show. She'd pinch Diana's cheeks at every meeting while making demands about the ceremony. Diana had to wear the dress Eleanor picked. Diana had to use Eleanor's ancient hairdresser. Diana had to include all of Eleanor's friends even though Diana had never met them. Each demand came with cheek pinches that got harder when Diana hesitated. Diana never complained, just smiled and nodded. Eleanor started bringing Diana to all family events to show off how well-behaved she was compared to the rest of us. She'd pinch Diana's cheeks in front of everyone while praising her submissiveness, saying this was what a real woman looked like. At the wedding rehearsal dinner, Eleanor gave a speech about how she'd trained Diana properly through loving discipline. She grabbed Diana's face for a demonstration of her pinching technique, really digging in while explaining how physical reminders helped young people remember their place. Diana just kept smiling. Eleanor was so proud she demanded Diana thank her for the guidance. Diana stood up, still smiling, and said she had an announcement. Before Eleanor could react, Diana mentioned she'd been so inspired by Eleanor's physical approach to affection that she wanted to share her own. Turns out Diana was a professional wrestler who went by Diamond Diana in the women's circuit. She'd been trained in submission holds and grappling for 10 years. She grabbed Eleanor's wrist in what she called a loving grip, the same way Eleanor grabbed cheeks, and demonstrated a modified wrestling hold she'd named the Grandma Clutch in Eleanor's honor. Eleanor tried to pull away, but Diana held on, explaining this was just affection, just like Eleanor taught her. Eleanor's face went red, then purple, not from pain, but from rage that someone was doing to her exactly what she'd done to everyone else. Diana held Eleanor's wrist in that grip for exactly as long as Eleanor typically held people's cheeks, about 30 seconds that felt like hours. When she finally let go, Eleanor had tears in her eyes from frustration. Diana announced that she looked forward to sharing this special greeting with Eleanor at every family gathering, just like Eleanor shared her pinches with everyone. She said it was tradition now. Eleanor tried to say that was assault, but Diana innocently said she was just following Eleanor's example of showing physical affection to family members, whether they wanted it or not. If Eleanor could pinch, Diana could grip. The whole family was silent. Grandma was gritting her teeth and pushed Diana off the stage. Eleanor stumbled back from the stage like someone had shoved her hard, catching herself on a chair that scraped loud against the floor. Her face went from that angry purple to this weird twisted look, half shock and half pure rage, like she couldn't believe what just happened. The whole rehearsal dinner went dead quiet, that kind of silence where you can hear people breathing and the air conditioning humming. Everyone just stared at Diana, who stood at the microphone looking calm as anything, her shoulders relaxed and her expression totally neutral, like she hadn't just grabbed our grandmother's wrist in some wrestling hold. My brother moved to Diana's side fast, took her hand in his and squeezed it. He didn't say anything, but the message was clear to everyone watching. He was with her, not with Eleanor, and that simple action of holding hands felt bigger than any speech he could have given. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then I heard this slow clapping sound from across the room. Lorelai stood up from her table, tears running down her face, clapping her hands together in this deliberate way that made everyone turn to look at her. She clapped louder, faster, and then Milo jumped up next to her and started clapping too. I felt something break loose in my chest, this tight thing I'd been holding for years, and I stood up and clapped. My hands stung from how hard I was hitting them together. Other people started standing, cousins and friends and people who'd watched Eleanor pinch and grab and hurt people for decades. Half the room was on their feet applauding while the other half sat frozen in their chairs looking horrified. Some people had their mouths hanging open. Others were staring at their plates like they wished they could disappear. The applause got louder and I saw Eleanor's face change again. Eleanor's face drained of color, going from that angry purple to white as paper. Her eyes moved around the room, taking in all the people standing and clapping, then looking at the people still sitting who were her supporters. You could see the exact moment she realized the family was split. That for the first time in her whole life, people weren't just silently taking her abuse. They were actually opposing her, right to her face, in public. Her hand shook as she pointed one finger at Diana. Her voice came out shrill and too loud. She wouldn't attend the wedding tomorrow. Diana had shown her true disrespectful nature. My brother was making the biggest mistake of his life. She kept pointing at Diana while she talked, her whole arm trembling, and spit flew from her mouth when she said the word mistake. My brother didn't raise his voice or move closer to Eleanor. He just stood there holding Diana's hand and said that was Eleanor's choice to make. Diana would be his wife tomorrow whether Eleanor came or not. He was tired of watching his grandmother hurt people he loved. His voice stayed level and calm, but every word hit like a hammer. Eleanor gasped, this dramatic sucking in of air like someone had actually slapped her across the face. She grabbed her purse off the table, nearly knocking over a wine glass, and turned toward the exit. Her heels clicked fast on the floor. Giovanna and Hank scrambled out of their chairs, scraping them back loud, and rushed after her. Giovanna threw this look back at Diana, her face all pinched up with disapproval, and Hank shook his head like Diana had done something terrible. Two other relatives got up and followed them out, moving quick like they were afraid to be left behind. The rehearsal dinner split right down the middle after that. Eleanor's supporters grabbed their coats and purses and left in the stream of people who wouldn't look at anyone as they walked out. The rest of us stayed, and once the door closed behind the last person leaving, the tension in the room changed. People started talking again, quiet at first, then louder. Someone laughed. The waiters who'd been standing frozen against the wall started moving again, clearing plates and refilling water glasses. Diana stepped down from the stage area and people crowded around her, touching her arm and hugging her. She explained to a group of us how she'd been training herself not to react to Eleanor's pinching the same way she trained to withstand pain in the wrestling ring. She'd been waiting for the perfect moment to make her point, planning it out while Eleanor thought she was being submissive and obedient. She'd known from the first time Eleanor grabbed her face that she wasn't going to let it continue, but she also knew she needed the right setting to make everyone see what was happening. I pulled Diana aside when the crowd around her thinned out a little. We stood near the windows where it was quieter. I thanked her for doing what none of us had the courage to do, and my voice cracked when I said it. Diana looked at me with these serious eyes and told me she'd watched Eleanor hurt me at every family gathering since she'd met my brother. She'd seen the way I'd flinch when Eleanor came near me, how I'd try to position myself far away from her at dinners. She knew someone had to stop the cycle because it wasn't going to stop itself. Diana said standing up to bullies was what she did professionally, getting in the ring with women who wanted to hurt her and refusing to back down. Eleanor was just another opponent who needed to learn that some people fight back. The way she said it was so matter of fact, like of course she'd done this, like there was never any question she'd let Eleanor keep hurting people. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment when Diana grabbed Eleanor's wrist over and over in my head. The look on Eleanor's face, the sound of Lorelai's clapping starting, the way half the room stood up and the other half looked sick. I felt this weird mix of satisfaction and anxiety churning in my stomach. Part of me was so happy someone had finally put Eleanor in her place, had shown her what it felt like to be grabbed and held against your will, but another part of me kept worrying about tomorrow. Would Eleanor show up at the wedding and cause some huge scene? Would she bring her supporters to protest or disrupt things? Would the family division ruin my brother's special day? I kept imagining different bad scenarios, Eleanor screaming during the vows, or Giovanna standing up to object, or Eleanor's friends staging some kind of walkout during the ceremony. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eleanor's face going white with rage, and I felt anxious all over again. The wedding day arrived bright and sunny, one of those perfect spring mornings with blue sky and birds singing. I got to the venue early to help Diana get ready, and she seemed totally calm, doing her makeup in the mirror while other bridesmaids ran around stressed. The ceremony started at 2 and Eleanor didn't show up. I kept watching the door during the processional, half expecting her to burst in at the last second, but she never came. Giovanna didn't come either, and neither did the two other relatives who'd left with Eleanor last night. There were these obvious empty seats in the family section that everyone tried not to look at. But the ceremony was beautiful anyway, maybe even more beautiful because there wasn't that tension of waiting for Eleanor to do something awful. Diana walked down the aisle looking powerful and radiant, her shoulders back and her head high. She didn't look anything like the meek, quiet victim Eleanor had thought she was claiming for the family. She looked like exactly what she was, a professional athlete who knew her own strength and wasn't afraid to use it. At the reception, I noticed something weird right away. Diana and my brother had stationed friends near all the entrances to the venue. I recognized a couple of Diana's wrestling friends, big women with serious faces, standing casually by the doors but clearly watching everyone who came in. My brother had some buddies from college positioned near the parking lot entrance. Nobody said anything about it, but the message was clear. They were prepared in case Eleanor tried to crash the reception. The whole thing made me feel sad and angry at the same time. Sad that we had to have security at a family wedding. Sad that my brother and his new wife had to spend energy and thought on protecting their celebration from his own grandmother. But also angry that Eleanor had created a situation where this was necessary, where we couldn't just relax and enjoy the party because we had to stay alert for her next move. I realized how much energy our family had always spent managing Eleanor's behavior, instead of actually enjoying being together. During dinner, Lorelai got up to give a speech. She stood at the microphone where Diana had made her announcement last night, and her voice shook at first, but got stronger as she talked. She said watching Diana last night had shown her something important. Accepting abuse wasn't love. Real family protected each other instead of enabling bullies. She talked about the bruises Eleanor had left on her face last year, how she'd worn makeup for weeks to cover them up and told people she'd bumped into a door. She said she was done making excuses for Eleanor, done pretending the pinching was just an old woman's way of showing affection. Several relatives shifted in their seats looking uncomfortable, staring down at their plates or taking sudden long drinks of water. But other people nodded along with what Lorelai was saying, and some had tears in their eyes. I watched the family dynamic actively changing right there in real time. This shift from silent acceptance to open acknowledgement of what had been happening for years. It felt like something breaking and something else beginning at the same time. 3 days after the wedding, my phone rang with Eleanor's number on the screen. I stared at it for 3 full rings before I picked up because Eleanor hadn't called me directly in maybe 5 years. She usually went through my mom or just showed up announced wherever I happened to be. Her voice sounded different when I answered, smaller somehow, less like she was giving orders and more like she was asking for something. She wanted to meet for coffee, just the two of us. She said she'd been thinking about some things and wanted to talk. I agreed to meet her mostly because I was curious what she could possibly want to say after what happened at the rehearsal dinner. Part of me wondered if she was planning some kind of revenge against Diana, or if she wanted me to help her get back at my brother for supporting his wife. I picked a coffee shop near my apartment, somewhere public where she couldn't make a scene without witnesses. Eleanor was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived. She looked older than I remembered, more tired around the eyes. She'd ordered herself a tea and had her hands wrapped around the cup like she needed the warmth. I got my coffee and sat down across from her and waited for her to start talking. She didn't apologize, not exactly, but she told me she'd been thinking about what Diana said at the rehearsal dinner, about physical affection and how Eleanor showed it. She said her own grandmother had raised her the same way, with hard pinches and rough handling that was supposed to be love. She claimed she never meant to hurt anyone, that she thought she was showing care the only way she knew how. Her voice got quieter as she talked, and she kept looking down at her tea instead of at my face. I let her finish talking before I responded. Then I told her that intention doesn't erase impact. I said every single person she'd ever pinched had asked her to stop at some point, had pulled away or said it hurt or tried to avoid her at family gatherings. She kept doing it anyway because she enjoyed the control. I used that word specifically, control, and watched her flinch when I said it. She started to argue, her voice getting louder and her back straightening up like she was about to launch into one of her usual speeches about respect and elders. Then she stopped herself mid-sentence and sat there in silence for what felt like a full minute. Finally, she admitted that maybe I was right. The words came out quiet and stiff like they hurt her to say. Eleanor asked if she could attend family Christmas in 2 months. She said she understood if people needed space, but she didn't want to miss the holiday with her family. I told her that wasn't my decision to make, that she'd have to talk to my brother and Diana and probably some of the other relatives too. But I also told her that if she did come, she needed to keep her hands to herself completely. No pinching, no grabbing, no touching anyone who didn't ask for it. She agreed too quickly, nodding and saying of course she understood, she would respect everyone's boundaries. The speed of her agreement made me realize she was trying to negotiate her way back into power, rather than actually changing her behavior. She was making the minimum concession she thought would get her access to the family again. I talked to my brother and Diana about the coffee meeting that same evening. I went over to their apartment and told them everything Eleanor had said and how she'd reacted. Diana listened carefully, and then warned me that abusers often make small concessions to regain access to their victims. She said Eleanor would probably behave perfectly for a while, just long enough to get everyone to relax and trust her again. Then she'd start pushing boundaries in small ways, testing to see what she could get away with. Diana suggested we set clear boundaries as a family, and stick to them consistently no matter what. Otherwise, Eleanor would just find new ways to control people, maybe not through pinching, but through guilt trips or playing the victim or turning family members against each other. My brother organized a family meeting 2 weeks later. He invited everyone except Eleanor to discuss boundaries going forward. We met at Lorelai and Milo's house because they had the biggest living room. About 15 people showed up, including some aunts and uncles I hadn't seen since the wedding. My brother started by explaining what had happened at the rehearsal dinner for the few people who hadn't been there. Then he opened up the floor for people to share their experiences with Eleanor. The meeting got heated fast. Giovanna stood up and accused us of being cruel to an old woman who was just set in her ways. She said Eleanor came from a different generation, and we were being disrespectful by trying to change her. Lorelai had been sitting quietly up until that point, but when Giovanna said that, she pulled out her phone. She showed everyone photos she'd taken last year of the bruises Eleanor had left on her face. The marks were dark purple and covered both her cheeks. Giovanna went completely quiet and sat back down. We spent the next hour establishing new family rules. No uninvited physical contact with anyone. No insulting comments disguised as concern or jokes. No showing up at people's homes or workplaces without permission. Clear consequences for violations, including being asked to leave gatherings immediately. Most people agreed to the rules and seemed relieved to have them spelled out clearly. But Giovanna and 3 other relatives refused to agree. They said we were being disrespectful to our elders and that family should forgive and forget instead of holding grudges. They got up and left the meeting early. My brother looked exhausted as he watched them go. The family had officially split into 2 groups, the ones who were done enabling Eleanor and the ones who thought we should just keep tolerating her behavior like we always had. Christmas came and Eleanor showed up with Giovanna at her side. They arrived exactly on time and Eleanor brought an expensive bottle of wine like she was making a peace offering. She spent the whole time sitting stiffly in an armchair in the corner of my brother's living room. She didn't pinch anyone or grab anyone's face. She kept her hands folded in her lap the entire time. But she made pointed comments about how cold and unwelcoming the family had become. She said things like, "I remember when Christmas used to be warm and loving," or "It's sad when families become so formal with each other." She sighed loudly whenever someone laughed or joked around. She made this hurt expression every time someone walked past her without stopping to chat. Giovanna sat next to her the whole time making sympathetic noises and shooting disapproving looks at the rest of us. Eleanor was creating an atmosphere of tension and playing the martyr. Everyone felt uncomfortable and on edge even though technically she was following all the rules we'd set. After Christmas, I couldn't stop thinking about how Eleanor had behaved. She hadn't pinched anyone, but she'd still managed to control the whole gathering through guilt and emotional manipulation. I called Diana and talked to her about this new approach Eleanor was using. Diana said she'd expected this kind of shift. She explained that people like Eleanor don't actually change their core behavior. They just adapt their tactics when the old ones stop working. Diana suggested we limit contact with Eleanor rather than trying to change her. She said some people will always choose power over connection, and we needed to accept that Eleanor was one of those people. We couldn't force her to become someone different. The best we could do was protect ourselves and set boundaries around how much access she had to our lives. By spring, the family had settled into a new pattern. Eleanor attended major gatherings like Easter and birthdays, but most of us kept our distance from her. She'd show up, sit in her corner with Giovanna and her supporters, make her pointed comments, and leave early. The rest of us had started enjoying family time again without constantly worrying about when Eleanor would strike. I stopped trying to manage her behavior or explain her to other people. I noticed she'd started pinching strangers again in public. I saw her grab a waitress's cheek at a restaurant where we were having a family dinner. The waitress looked shocked and upset. I didn't intervene or apologize for Eleanor, or try to smooth things over like I used to. I'd stopped feeling responsible for her actions. She was an adult who made her own choices and faced her own consequences. The barbecue 6 months later felt different from the start. Eleanor showed up with Giovanna like usual, carrying a store-bought potato salad that nobody would eat. She settled into her chair under the patio umbrella and watched everyone with that tight-lipped expression she'd perfected since the wedding. My brother was grilling burgers while Diana helped set up the drink station. Kids ran around the yard playing tag. Everything seemed normal until the young server from the catering company walked past Eleanor's chair carrying a tray of appetizers. I saw Eleanor's hand start to move up, that familiar reaching gesture she'd done thousands of times before. The server was maybe 19 with round cheeks that Eleanor would have loved to pinch, but Diana was there in half a second, stepping between them so smoothly it looked choreographed. She took the tray from the server and thanked her, then turned to Eleanor with that professional wrestler smile. Diana explained the server was just doing her job and didn't need any special attention from family members. Eleanor's hand dropped back to her lap. She didn't argue or make a scene. She just nodded once and looked away. The whole interaction took maybe 10 seconds, but I felt something shift in my chest watching it happen. Diana had changed everything without even trying to change Eleanor herself. That evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine watching the sunset turn the sky orange and pink. The day had gone well enough. Eleanor hadn't caused drama. The family had actually relaxed and enjoyed themselves. But I kept thinking about how messy this whole solution turned out to be. Eleanor hadn't transformed into some sweet, loving grandmother who learned her lesson. She still made pointed comments and played the victim whenever she could. The family was still split between people who supported the new boundaries and people who thought we were being cruel to an old woman. Diana still had to run interference at gatherings. Nothing was perfect or wrapped up neatly like it would be in a movie. But I also felt lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying a heavy backpack for years and finally set it down. I didn't care anymore whether Eleanor approved of my teaching career or my life choices. I didn't feel responsible for managing her behavior or protecting other people from her. I'd learned that protecting myself wasn't the same as being disrespectful, and that was enough growth for now.